Hello or namaste. Welcome to Atypical Dikkate, a conversation podcast. I'm your host Soumya, and in this podcast, I talk to fellow queer, neurodivergent, and disabled folks. This podcast is not just a repository of stories and experiences, but it is also a journey to build solidarity, queer intimacy, and a community while highlighting neglected issues including sexual and reproductive health and rights. Today, I have Kahless with me. Kahless is a trans writer and activist based in Colombo with a focus on queer, reproductive, indigenous, and disability justice and liberation. He hopes to challenge the dominant narratives about queerness and disability through engaging in meaningful dialogue and enacting radical change. Thanks, Kahless, for taking the time to join me today. And, we don't hear a lot of radical change or transformative change right now given the social scenario we are in, but I'm looking forward to the conversation with you today. Thanks again so much.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. And as you already know, I could go on about this for hours. So it's really just my pleasure being here.
Yeah, Kahless, before we go into your work, I would like to start from your personal experiences and your journey. So can you share what it has been like for you navigating daily life as someone who is both trans and disabled in the Sri Lankan context?
Well, it's a multi-layered question, of course. And so I guess I'll just start with giving a little bit of context as to who I am. I am a trans man. I identify as a trans man. And also I do have to live with chronic disabling issues. When these two issues collide and they compound, you can bet that it's going to be a tough ride, especially in a country like Sri Lanka. I'm saying this with as much love as I can muster. I was born and raised in this country. And one thing that you will immediately notice is that we will call ourselves a social democracy, right? But the social part of it, it's been a work in progress for decades. I feel like we're still enacting that particular term here. You will find that in spaces like medicine, even in places like architecture and engineering, we're still woefully ignorant about the issues of marginalized communities and how to make spaces accessible and welcoming to them and how to make places inclusive so that it just seamlessly blends, that we could all seamlessly blend into this society together. So that's just some context before I dive into my personal experiences. I feel like it is kind of relevant to state that I am Muslim, especially because I personally don't come from a very conservative family, but we are a practicing family of Muslims. And I'm thankful enough that, after many years, I've been able to kind of build a support network here in this country with both my family, friends, and even like a wider network of people who've always offered me support. So I am technically one of the more privileged people in this country and one of the more privileged trans people in this country, one of the more privileged disabled people in this country, because I've got people looking out for me wherever there are gaps. But I can't say the same for everybody else, because regardless of the privilege, regardless of the safety nets, regardless of the support that I do have, I've still been subjected to violence over the years and continue to face such violence as well as microaggressions, which are also a form of violence. So it starts with the ignorance and the hush nature with it, which we talk about both disability and transness in Sri Lanka, even in this day and age, like it's something to be ashamed of. It all starts there. Because, Soumya, how they always say like, this person's boy, this person's child is actually a little bit not right in the head. That's how they bring up these issues, you may have heard in some circles and the ways that some people gossip about other people. So that is a very prevalent experience in Sri Lanka still, despite all the raising awareness campaigns and everything that we've done, so many NGOs working in their own divisions, trying to kind of bridge that knowledge gap and the conversation. We're still failing to meet expectations in bridging that gap. We still haven't gotten there yet. So with ignorance comes fear and hate, and that is very pervasive in this country. There was a lull. I felt it there was a bit of a lull pre-2020 where it felt like things were opening up, where I started seeing my queer friends and people I know in the community, disability activists, finally get some like proper platforms, finally receive proper platforms to speak on, issues. But something happened after 2020, after COVID, where I saw, not just me, but even like internet watchdogs have seen a rapid increase in conservative and far-right ideology, not just in Sri Lanka, but across the world. You got to protect, security, safety. These became the buzzwords that were suddenly rushed out to enact archaic laws or to criminalize simply existing in public. And that's sort of like how we've been progressing, and we're currently progressing as well. Violence in Sri Lanka, like against the disability community or the trans or generally queer community, manifests in many different ways. But you can even see parallels across the oceans, where in America, for example, I heard of a story where school teachers snipped a student's insulin pump tube because they mistook it for earphones. No conversation there, no questioning, just straight to consequences over a misunderstanding. But that is lethal for that child. And what happens afterwards? Like, what do they claim afterwards? This is how violence manifests. This is how lack of understanding, lack of knowledge on disability can manifest, and this is what it could look like. And it is aggressive. It is hurtful, harmful, and it can kill. Right? And in Sri Lanka, what I can say is that a lot of private history becomes public gossip, not just for disabled people, but also trans people. For example, when I went to get my gender recognition certificate sorted out, I had to go speak to the Grama Niladhari, which is like the village head, a village officer. And he did not need to interrogate my neighbors, but he did. But the issue here was that he was interrogating my neighbors from my hometown who were not as familiar with me as my neighbors from the Colombo city that I was living in, because that's where I'd been for the many, many years that I'd been working in Colombo, because I'm from out of Colombo, right? So it was, luckily, I am blessed that I had decent neighbors who defended me and spoke up for me despite barely knowing me, which got this situation going. Otherwise, what could have happened is people could have spoken ill of me. They could have tanked my opportunity to get this certificate, this gender recognition certificate, but they didn't do that. But I can't say the same for other trans people in this country. Yeah, that's what it looks like.
It also makes me reflect, what is SRHR and how it doesn't exist in a silo. It feeds into social issues, legal issues of a queer, trans and disabled person, how everything is sort of interlinked, and you can't view just one intersection and not consider others. And it's also making me think about 2 follow-up questions actually. So in your experience, what are some of the current legal pathways that are available for trans people in Sri Lanka to change their name and gender markers? You mentioned some of the challenges, but what are some other challenges that are very prevalent, especially for those in the rural context? And how different is it for trans people, like when it comes to the intersection of transness and disability, transness and mental health challenges? Is the disability community or the mental health community equipped enough to understand the realities of trans lives in the Sri Lankan context?
So I'll take on the legal pathways question first. In Sri Lanka, a trans person must first go to a government clinic. I went to the mental health clinic at the government hospital, where a specialist would actually sit with you, talk to you at length, get down your medical records, your history, and then would put you under a period of observation. This could be like 1.5 years, even 2 years, depending on the individual. And you will have to drop in at the clinic for follow-ups. They will also ask you about the medication that you're on. And if you are on mental health medications, very likely that they might take you off of it. And this could also, lead to other issues, which I will come back to later. But if the person who is overviewing your procedure, your process, is satisfied and thinks that you've done, because they'll first recommend you socially transition, and they will sort of just review that, and they will just sort of touch base with you on what the progress has been like and how your gender expression is evolving, and so on and so forth. And then they will give you the documents you need to go ahead and start that process. So they will issue a gender recognition certificate, and a social worker will basically sign off on it. And this certificate is what you have to go through with to the Gramaniladari, as we call it, as I mentioned earlier. There is a very complicated, convoluted process where you have to go from one place to another to get stamps of approval, and he'll send it off to councils. They'll give you a stack of documents, and this document is what you have to eventually take to get your birth certificate at the registrar's office or so on. Get your birth certificate amended. You do not get a birth certificate with a fresh gender in the old blank where there would have been your previous gender marker. They will add a note to the back of your birth certificate at the bottom. There is a blank space. They will add a note saying that you've amended it and that you are now the other gender. From here on, you will also have to go through the process of getting all of your ID and everything, your passport, documents and everything, which will also get from the registrar's office. They'll give you like a stack of papers for that as well, like one copy for each relevant department. Let's say the passport office, there is like one document that is addressed to the passport office. You just get that one stack, and you got to keep it real safe. And after that is basically just you having to go and get each of those things updated. Get your new NIC, get your updated passport, and so on. And this is just me kind of condensing many months of chasing into a couple of minutes. By the way, this is a very lengthy, sometimes arduous process. You've got to take many days off. You got to do a lot of waiting, a lot of begging, a lot of running around, getting lawyers to write affidavits, getting them to sign off on it. So that's on the legal pathways. So the next one you asked me was about the intersection of transness and disability, and whether the mental health community and the disability community is equipped to kind of understand the trans experience. I don't think there is any one person who fully grasps the full extent of a complete other human being's life or experiences. So I always offer more grace to my other fellow marginalized peoples of varying backgrounds. It's not fair to expect them to know everything. What matters is the effort put forth to learn more, and I think that we can also do better in that stance as well. The queer community can do that. The disability community and the queer disabled people exist. I will say this though, aside from the communities themselves, the structures, the infrastructure in place is very, very hostile towards both disabled people and trans people. So aside from the communities themselves, I feel like the infrastructure that's in place to address our needs is very hostile and very narrow. They're so narrow that they leave all communities, even people without overlap, they leave us scrambling for resources, scrambling to get our needs and wants addressed. So the infrastructures meant to address our needs have left us all in survival mode for far too long, that I don't think we've had the space to fully collaborate to address our collective needs. But from my experience, I feel like we, especially in the NGO space, a lot of the time, or like in these feminist organizations, we always try to like meet up, do things collaboratively and support each other, in Sri Lanka at least. And that's something that I've seen happening quite frequently, especially with like grassroots organizations, small individuals even. They put in a lot of effort and a lot of work into helping people understand each other's needs and wants, and about liberating all of us collectively. So that is what I've witnessed. But that doesn't mean that there aren't any holes in the conversation. There'll always be. I just hope that we are able to resolve those through mutual discussion and mutual action.
No, absolutely. We can't expect everyone to know about every lived experience. What we can provide each other is a little more space, a little more grace and understanding, and also be cognizant that all of us will end up making mistakes. But yeah, then how do we go forward from there? And you brought up about infrastructure, which is actually a great segue for the next question that I had in my mind. Medical institutions in the Sri Lankan context, everywhere they actually fail trans and disabled individuals. And I would like to focus this a little more on trans and disabled individuals. So, in your personal experience, what forms of gatekeeping have you experienced, either personally or communally? What is it like?
Yes, I've always said that it is one of the most heartbreaking forms of discrimination, medical discrimination, because for the longest time, I was always raised to believe that everyone who enters medicine enters with the hope of helping their fellow human beings or living beings. So it's always, I feel like I get so much whiplash every time this happens, but it has happened. I have had recent experiences. I've had ones in the past. One that definitely ruined things for me was during the initial 8 years of the COVID pandemic. It was really difficult to just walk into a hospital, especially if there are lockdowns or curfew. So you would call up, you would make an appointment, and you would go just because you'll get stopped on the roads and the cops will ask you questions and so on. So I recall calling up a bunch of clinics and trying to set up an appointment with the gynecologist because I was in a lot of pain and I was going through a really bad time and I couldn't figure out what was going on with me. The thing is that it is genuinely so scary how shocked they were that a trans man would need access to these services as well. So they just did not take me seriously, or they would just like deliberate extensively. And I'm like, I feel like this should be common knowledge by now. And there was also the matter of not being able to access hospitals further away. So there was also the geographic restrictions of it. I'm sure there's at least one hospital in the country that definitely knows how to cater to trans people for sure, but I can't speak for all. But this was my biggest wake-up call because up until that point, I had not formally transitioned. This was just shortly after I had formally transitioned. And I was quote-unquote viewed as a cis man when I walked into a place because I'd grown out a beard and we were masking and whatnot. And things were easier. But prior to that, I had no issue accessing gynecological care. Now I was being barred before a person had even actually listened to what issue I had. It was decided on my behalf against my will. And that is just one form of medical gatekeeping that happens. There is a severe limitation on specialized care already. We have brain drain on massive proportions after our economic collapse and after COVID. And we are seriously struggling to staff our hospitals, even our government hospitals and so on. There is a lack of HRT, for example. If you're trans and you go to the government hospital, usually they would give you free vials, which they would actually they would give you the medication, they would inject it for you. But a lot of the time, they're out of stock. And the thing about testosterone, for example, is you cannot just miss doses and then go back to the full dose just like willy-nilly like that. It affects you. It affects your body, and you cannot just miss a dose, take a dose too early. That's not how it works. But when there is a severe lack of this medication and there's no way to find it out on the streets because it is a regulated substance to some extent, especially like across borders, but even on the pharmacies that you find here, you can't just buy it either. So some days I've gone to maybe 20, 25 pharmacies looking for it. I've walked countless streets, gone out of the city, and I've come back empty-handed. That has happened multiple times. And those were really difficult times. So the fact that they don't view HRT as life-saving medication, another form of medical gatekeeping. You wouldn't deny someone the hormones that they need that would literally keep them alive. You wouldn't deny somebody insulin. You wouldn't be like, actually, no, we are not going to stock up insulin. We're going to deprioritize it. No, that would actually kill someone. So the way transness is still being viewed and talked about is as if it is something that is like a minor little issue getting on HRT. You can get off it, you can get on it. We will take you off mental health medications, but we will not ensure that you have enough mental support, so on and so forth. There are many, many issues, and they are all interconnected. Mental health support you brought up is another thing that I can share. A recent incident where a friend of mine had to go to the Angola mental health, like the hospital, and their experience was so bad, they got even more depressed upon going there, because the mental health professionals there spoke in very, very archaic psychological terms, in things that have been debunked. You can't just get over depression. You can't get yourself out of and fair warning, suicidal ideation. If you are deeply, deeply in this, it's very hard to pull yourself out. So the advice that my friend received was, why don't you binge watch a TV show? Why don't you distract yourself with some entertainment until you stop feeling this? That was the advice that they received. They were asked, do you intend to harm yourself? This person was like, yes, I'm thinking about it. But do you intend to harm anyone else? This person said, no. Therefore, you're not quote unquote crazy. You seem sane. Hearing this just made my blood boil. This is supposed to be a place that's supposed to help people when they're at their most vulnerable. And this is how they talk. This is how they talk to people. So, as you can see, everything is just very difficult.
It's weird how you have to choose while also accessing medical care. You can either avail treatment, help, support for your mental health challenges, or you can seek support and ascertain your legal rights as a trans individual. Trans lives and disabled lives are actually left out from broader sexual and reproductive health and rights conversation. I don't think the ASRHR discourse truly actually understands how alienating it must be. In your experience, what are some of the efforts, if at all they have been made, to include trans and disabled individuals specifically in the ASRHR conversations in Sri Lanka?
I feel like we have made very, very little. There's been so much stagnation and lack of progress. I genuinely don't think there is a lot I can say about this aside from the platitudes we've been offered. So, quite frankly, Sri Lanka has been in a period of stagnation when it comes to disability justice and trans justice and liberation. We still categorize these things as if they are social taboos in some ways, right? Gender identity and expression. Our constitution does not have explicit provisions safeguarding us against discrimination, targeting gender identity and expression. And we only ever hear platitudes from a point of saviorism when it comes to disabled people and the disabled community. There's really no point in just repeating ourselves over and over again and not being heard, because if we were heard, the solutions we've been providing for years would have been put into practice by now. The fact is, it'll just go around in circles. They will simply just update us with hey, so don't look at a person and call them this slur. That is bad. But that's about the extent of most activism these days. And I'm sorry if I sound a little doom and gloom, but the fact is I am genuinely just very exhausted because I haven't even been carrying the brunt of this battle. It hasn't been me. I have watched people work their lives away, people who've put in decades to see the most minor outcomes. And I feel like this tug of war that we have with the state, where someone will come in, someone will leave, someone will come in, someone will leave, but rights that are there today can be taken away tomorrow. because there's enough loopholes, there's enough propaganda, there's enough bigotry to make it happen, to make narratives shift. There's enough provisions in other inscrutable parts of the law through which they could criminalize our very existence. And that's the kind of reality we are living in. And it's a shame that we haven't collectively come to this understanding, like, can we please, sir, can we have more, is not working in our favor. It's simply not, because where are the accessible facilities everywhere? Where is the so-called utopia when you can't even access most government buildings properly? And like, even a wheelchair ramp, it's the simplest thing that you could even consider. The first thing that most of these folks consider when they say, oh, let's make accommodations. And even that is very hard. There's legitimately been this issue where there are wheelchair ramps in some buildings, but it's several floors high. They only have stairs. They don't have a lift. So how are you going to go up? There are actual buildings like that exist. And I think that's just, another shortcoming of living in an ableist and unfortunately queerphobic world. This is not special to Sri Lanka. Even the most, as people call them, democratic or liberal nations in Europe, even they have their own shortcomings. So this is not just me being fed up with things in Sri Lanka. I'm just being quite plain with my thoughts on the matter.
No, absolutely, Kahless. And a lot of the times, I'm guilty of this actually. Whenever I have something that I want to bring up, something that makes me uncomfortable, and I see that others in the room are not reacting that way, I end up thinking to myself, am I that annoying? I remember one of the initial conversations with regards to the Sri Lankan context that I was having with my mentor. And she shared a story where even if after running through all the hoops and everything, people are able to avail a gender transition surgery, socially they are still not seen that way. Like, for example, if a female assigned at birth person goes through a gender transition surgery, and then they are still brought back to the quote unquote female ward. So what does that even mean? And like you said, rights, we are living in a world where, what does rights-based work even mean? Where your rights can be snatched away at any point in time, laws can be reversed. So in all this context, what is even rights-based work and justice-based work? And all of this violence, the real life violence, translates into online spaces. As you said, places are not accessible. So what is left to us? Digital communities. Especially after COVID, I saw a huge number of especially young queer disabled people getting support groups, peer support groups in these online platforms, through WhatsApp groups, through Twitter, because that is the place that is accessible to quite a lot of them. Especially, I know digital accessibility is something we are still struggling with within the disability community as well, with image descriptions and everything, which are not accessible. Most of the things are not accessible, but that became one of the places where the disability community could actually connect with each other. And with rise in that, violence also from the real life, the real world, it's traveling there right now. And the policies on these digital platforms, they are being weakened. Given all this, and because you work a lot in the online space, on online violence specifically, what role does online violence play in shaping the lived experiences of queer and disabled people in Sri Lanka? And how does the state or platform regulation or lack thereof affect their safety?
I think I'll start off with the rights-based approach and the why I personally take on a give us liberation or give us, that kind of approach to this, because rights and the rights framework. The issue with a rights-based approach is you always try to work within an oppressive system. The thing is, if you have a moldy block of cheese, the mold that you see on top of the cheese is the last bloom. It is already deep. The rot is deep within the cheese. At a microscopic level, it has spread out everywhere. And now you're only seeing what has visually manifested at the top. So you might slice out the visible blooms, but you're still eating fungus if you eat the rest of the cheese, and maybe not even the good kind. Playing with your life there. So the reason why I go for a liberation and justice approach over a rights-based approach is because I view it like a moldy block of cheese, right? A oppressive system is like a moldy block of cheese where all the mold you see on the surface of the cheese is just the last stage of it blooming. It is infected with spores deep within on a molecular level. And that's the same with oppressive systems. It is built on a foundation that did not take us into account. Therefore, there will always be gaps in that foundation for bigotry and persecution to fester. With a rights-based approach, you are slicing the visible mold off the moldy cheese, but you're still eating the moldy cheese. But what happens with liberation and justice is you throw out that cheese and you get a new one. You can just do that. You don't have to eat the moldy cheese. You don't need to put up with the cracks that will eventually come and get you if the wrong person is in power. You want something that is solid and fresh, that will take you into account and is built from the bottom up to protect everyone. And that's my response to most of these rights-based approaches. In general, I'm just like, sometimes a system is so corrupt, you can't work with it. You have to break it down and rebuild it. And that is possible. We've done it as human beings a bazillion times over across our history. It's just one system. This might be our first run. So give ourselves some grace and actually consider radical change for once. So that's my answer to that. But in terms of online violence in particular, this is a bit of a touchy topic because yes, it is where I do most of my work. See, the thing about online violence is there are very real, very scary threats online. But it's also such an efficient and great tool, like to connect with the world, to learn about the world, and to also get your story out and make sure that you are aware of everything that's going on around you. Building community, mobilizing. You can't just build a multi-million attendee protest with handing out leaflets in a street corner. You put it on social media, you blow it up with lots of videos and reels. There are always benefits to existing online, especially for trans people, especially for disabled people, and everyone in different marginalized groups. There's always going to be benefits. But the flip side is wherever there is such a benefit, you can also expect some harms to coexist with it. You mentioned that for a lot of queer people, these online safe spaces are really vital. You're absolutely right. Because even I know that I had to crowdfund half my surgery because I literally could not afford it. I'm lucky I did because just the week after I got my surgery, we went into lockdown. So if I hadn't done that, I would have been on a waiting list for the next 2 years because trans top surgeries and all got deprioritized and pushed way down the waiting list at the government clinic. So that's one thing I just wanted to throw in there in the form of medical negligence, even though I was not negligence, but just mistreatment. I do think that one thing that we need to keep in mind is online spaces are owned by people with their own agendas. The platforms are owned by people with their own agendas. And these people, they will do whatever it takes to profit because it is a means of profiting. They're not doing this out of their own goodwill. They did not wake up one day and say, I want to connect the world and I want everyone to learn about each other's cultures and be best friends. Mark Zuckerberg was like, I want to build this platform so I can rank hot girls in my university and my college. So we don't have to speak about it like it was some great selfless act. We can be rational about this. So if you as a marginalized individual end up in one of these online platforms and are targeted for being visibly queer online or visibly disabled online or visibly Muslim online or visibly a woman online, there are no measures to truly protect you as of yet. Technology is advancing at a rapid pace. We're all familiar with that. But is the law also advancing at a rapid pace? No. Are the structures, the security structures also like catching up at the same pace? No. So what are we doing? We're just waiting around, debating back and forth. Should we do this? Should we do that? Or we are fear mongering, causing mass hysteria and saying they're coming for your women, they're coming for your kids. Everybody put your IDs and your social security and your thumbprint and your face and your voice online, or else you can't access Wikipedia to read about your favorite anime. I mean, it's ridiculous. But Sri Lanka also had a similar situation where we rushed to pass this archaic law, online safety law, to address online violence. And there are next to no provisions that are actually helpful for marginalized people. Like, did you take some time to actually think this out and structure it in a way that's supportive? Nope. Blanket statements, vague terms, it's the same, rinse and repeat. You see that a lot with most of these online safety bills. Now, in terms of safe spaces, I think one thing that we need to remember is we wouldn't need to be online if offline weren't so terrible. That is always point number one. It's that we've not only lost our third spaces, society is still hostile. It's driving people online to find their community. It's driving people like kids online who are facing discrimination, harassment, abuse in real life to seek comfort in the online friends and fandoms and so on. It's a great connector, but it also poses its own threats. So what can we do? What can we do to address it? That's a larger conversation, of course, but it's a double-edged sword. That sums it up pretty succinctly, I think.
And like you said, gender-based violence, child rights, online gender-based violence, TFGBV is also a part of ASRHR that we tend to forget sometimes. Thank you for bringing that up and also for highlighting and foregrounding that we need systems change instead of trying to fix the potholes, because that work is never ending. Given the overlapping forms of discrimination faced by trans and disabled individuals, I'm not putting on the spot to come up with solutions. Even if you have questions like what systemic changes or questions or something that you would like the listeners, to the community as a whole, to everyone who's working in this, to think about when it comes to systemic change, legal, medical, or infrastructure, that would meaningfully improve trans and disabled individuals' quality of life. Yeah.
So, what I can say is this. It's like I mentioned earlier, this conversation has been ongoing for a long time. The problems, the obstacles are there. The frameworks are there, the solutions are there. They have even been enacted in different countries across the world, and you can see it play out in real time. So it's not like there are no precedents for us to look back on and analyze and apply to a local context and even adapt it, improve on it to a local context. Comprehensive anti-discrimination laws should be number one at least. It should be number one in their minds. It is the absolute basic thing that you could give people, like a basic assurance that you can give, that you actually care about your citizens from diverse backgrounds. And there has to be some sort of universal access to specialized healthcare. I am so tired of repeating this, but healthcare is a human right. Before we privatized healthcare, before we had to set up these expensive hospitals, people were in the communities. They were revered for healing people. It was part of our culture. We loved doing it. We did it out of our passion for it and our talent for it. So we are healers, and I find it utterly ludicrous that we've chosen to leave that history behind and opted for this new sterile, clinical, bigoted form of it, where we gatekeep and we say, you don't get healthcare, you don't get healthcare. When once we would have said we would heal all. Is that not the goal? Like, I don't see why this is so difficult. So accessible healthcare for all includes disabled people, includes trans people, includes all like queer people, of all backgrounds. And even if it is STI clinics, which we have, like in Sri Lanka, we have STI clinics, which provide free medication, free examinations, which is super important. It is very important because not only does it provide a lot of information, it provides medications, it also provides a space for people to not go there and approach them and be like, hey, I need help. But even there is stigma, even there are issues. And that is why a people-centric approach needs to be enacted every time we talk about any of this. The solutions have to always come from a place of deep empathy. Talk to the people, listen to the people. They've already told you what you need to know. There is nothing new that needs to be told. You need to train healthcare workers. You need to have inclusive policies. You need to ensure there's mobility aids. Sex education is absolutely vital to save people from abusive situations, to know what's happening to their bodies, to prevent them from getting manipulated, or if they recognize they're getting sick, how to go and seek help. All of this is so important, but it's been said. But has it been done? Is it being done? And who is going to do it? A lot of feminist organizations have been given the brunt of the responsibility for, oh yeah, we are going to go to the rural areas and we are going to distribute this free condoms and we're going to give out pamphlets. We're going to inform them about safe sex. But why are we reliant on these organizations when these are things that the state should do for our people? This is something that the government should do for our citizens. Who is going to take on this responsibility is the question. And that's a challenge. Maybe if we can be more involved in the conversation, that would be great. Please invite us into the rooms. We have a lot of thoughts and we have a lot of ways forward. Please invite us to sit down. Please give us the reins so that we can enact actual radical change. We can actually make a positive difference in the country. And also, actually go through with it. Please don't tell us, yeah, we'll consider making workplaces more accessible to disabled folks. Don't tell us that. Just do it. Just do it. Tell us afterwards. Let us know. But just do it. Yep. Everyone has said all of these before. What is something new that I can say? And I was like, wait. Why is it on us to always find something new to add to this very old conversation? So I was just like, yeah, you know what? I'll leave it up to the audience.
No, absolutely. And like you said, even the anger is valid. Because it's so many years, generations of injustice. So that's completely valid. And how often when these issues and marginalized body minds are brought into conversations, it centers a lot around trauma, around violence, and around discrimination. But what keeps me going is, and we shouldn't have to be resilient, but that is something we do despite everything, even with everything. So we deserve to be happy. We deserve to experience that joy, sense of community, which sometimes gets left behind while talking about all these things, which I think is also equally important, because that, to me, and I know a lot of people, is sustenance. So how do you envision queer disabled joy amidst these realities?
Oh, my favorite. I love queer joy. I love disability joy. I love being Muslim. I love being Sri Lankan. There's so many aspects to each of our identities there to celebrate. I love queer joy. I love disability joy. I have pride in a lot of parts of my identity. To me, what encapsulated queer joy, for example, for me was when, after transitioning and everything, I made my first cishet male friend post-transition who did not know I was trans. And then we became really close. He found out that I'm trans and he was like, oh bro, that's just fine. And then we just carried on with our day and nothing changed. I remember coming back home, texting my partner and saying, you know what, I love my friends. I have great friends. And I'm like, that was gender euphoria on another level. We just continued being bros. Nothing changed. I just want life to be like that, because I don't wake up in the morning saying I want to antagonize the world by existing. The world goes, actually, you're antagonizing by breathing the same air as us. Can you please not? I'm under no obligation to honor that request. For me, it's every minute that any of us defies that request to cease to exist, to cease breathing. Every moment of that is joyful to me. I'm so proud of the community. I'm so proud of our people. And I think we're doing the best we can in the most dire circumstances. Historically, we are part of a group that is almost always the first to get steamrolled when fascism is on the rise. But we're holding strong right now in the darkness of it all. And we're there for each other. We're mobilizing together. We're protesting together. We're pushing back together. And we're taking action together. And that brings me immense joy. And I hope that it will culminate in a mass sort of awakening where everyone realizes we got to support each other and then we fight for a world together. So yeah, that's what I envision.
I don't know if you realize this or not, but your energy, passion, and even the joy, it's infectious. I was muting myself, but I was constantly laughing and smiling and enjoying this whole conversation because this is what queer intimacy, disabled joy, to me it looks like this, knowing that I'm not alone in this world. Thanks so much.
I'm really glad.
No, absolutely. No, thanks so much, Kahless. It gave me a lot to think about also. And yeah, it's just for people who are listening. Why should marginalized people, vulnerable people have the onus of coming up with solutions all the time? It's time that we ask the difficult questions, and you who are sitting with the resources, why don't you come up with solutions and then validate it? Sit with us and validate it with us.
Absolutely. Tell us what you can do and then hit us up and then we'll do the rest. Give us the means.
Thank you so much, Kahless. It was lovely interacting with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you're awesome, Soumya. Thank you for giving me the space to just speak. And thank you for giving me the time. It was just so lovely speaking with you, even leading up to this. And I just had a really great time.